Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome home to USA Global TV and Radio. I'm Dr. JACALYN KERBECK, and our show today is the Corner Bookstore. And I want to thank you all so much for your follows, your subscribes, your comments. We are literally over 101,000 views on YouTube in the last 28 days. Yesterday was just 100,000. So you like us, and we like you for liking us. Thank you so much. This show is so popular. I didn't even get to tell Diane, but we're starting a second time slot for the Corner Bookstore. I hope she'll be joining us for that because we have so many authors from around the world who want to come and share their story. Today is no different. We have someone joining us from Canada who's going to be sharing his story as a fantasy book author. But before we bring him out, let's welcome the star of our show, Diann BOEHM. She's an international award-winning children's and young adult book author. She's also a very close friend. She is a global connector. She has been on all kinds of stages in her life as a beauty queen, as an actress, as a singer. She's an educator, and she is somebody who leads her life with her heart. Let's welcome her.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you. I have to see who you're talking about. No, thank you. It's so kind. And congratulations. It's the first time I've heard that number. So yay for you. I know how hard you've worked.
Oh, it's day and night, Diane.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't think you sleep or you have triplets or something going on. And yes, that is news. Wow, I'm glad we're so popular that we're adding another show. That's amazing.
It is. And I just want to let people know that you also have some other shows here, one of which is books, blogs, and poetry, in addition to the United Kingdom, and then also our show for children. We've had some people sign up for that recently. So get your roller skates on, Diane. All over the place.
You know, what's so exciting about this, Dr. JACALYN, is that there are so many authors that have amazing books and stories that they've written. And I'm just so grateful that you offer a platform for authors to be able to tell their story, their personal story, as well as a news story that they might be rolling out. So I think this is extremely exciting news, and I'm happy for USA Global TV, but I'm really happy for you.
Oh, thank you, my dear friend. I appreciate it. We are going to bring out our guest. I don't want to leave him backstage too long. He has success stories one after another. He was just telling a few backstage, and it made me smile because for both of us as authors, you're a full-time author. I'm a part-time author, but there's a lot of challenges along the way. There's a lot of joy. People think you have this, huge bank account. And I know some people do, from writing books. I have a little change jar. I think it's this big, maybe. But to hear about his success and the fact that people are just reacting to him in such a positive way is amazing. So let's welcome fantasy book author. It's Sebastien de Castell. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm just so charged up by the positive energy I'm getting from you and the stories that you share backstage. Tell us how you became passionate about becoming an author.
I became an author in a slightly offbeat way. I was working as a full-time musician, a traveling musician, making a hefty $250 a week, and being sued by the bass player of the band. So it was kind of falling apart quite rapidly. And this was a long time ago. And it was the worst kind of creative space to be in. And so I do what I always do when I get sort of lost in life, which is I went to my local library, because you can kind of always walk into a library and find something, you know. And I ended up finding a box of cassette tapes called "Let's Write a Mystery" by a guy named Ralph McInerney, who's passed away now, but he was actually quite a well-known mystery author. He wrote the Father Dowling Mysteries and others. And this was just a 24 cassette tapes where he would just talk to you and walk you through the process of writing a novel. And strangely, it was the one thing that allowed me to sort of get past all the blocks that a lot of people have when they're first writing, was just that patient voice of his, session after session, always going, have you written your pages today? And just talking about his process. And he includes the draft of the novel that he's writing along as he was recording this course. And that novel was absolutely terrible, which was a remarkable gift, I thought, from him to sort of expose, hey, your first draft isn't always going to be amazing. And here's what it looks like when I just toss something out there. And that got me writing my first novel, which was kind of incredible. And I felt like, I've done what I set out to do. I don't need to worry about more than that. I got a ton out of it. But then years later, I decided to write another novel. And during what's called the 3-day novel writing contest, which takes place every year. And people around the world try to write as close to a novel as they can in 3 days. Usually people, start at midnight and they've already got a big outline and they've worked out all their notes. I started with nothing. I went to bed as normal. I got up at 7 a.m. I in fact had a music gig that weekend. I had to sing, I think it was The Lady in Red at a wedding, which was not a sound anyone should have to hear coming from me. But over the course of those 3 days, I slept better than I usually sleep. I exercised and I wrote 44,000 words. Which is a remarkable amount for 3 days for me, certainly. And years later, when I revised that novel, that became Trader's Blade, which was this book right here, which got me a 4-book deal and launched my career as an author, which then after that, I got an 8-book deal for another series and then another 4-book deal. And I just had another 1-book deal for my latest novel, which is called The Malevolent Seven. And so it all came from walking into a library with no idea what I was going to do with my life, and finding a box of cassette tapes. I literally had to go find a cassette recorder because, who has those, even back then they were pretty much gone. So it was kind of a fun route to becoming an author.
Oh my gosh, I love this story.
It's great. Make a good movie.
It would. It's another example of something isn't working out. It doesn't feel right. And we keep doing. And then we stop. Something else comes and look where you are today. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for one of the things it really makes me think of, especially lately when sort of telling that story now, is it reminds me of how central libraries are as a place where we can all go and no one ideally is restricting what we can or can't find. And we find what we need, partly because nobody's sort of trying to sort of force us into one direction or another. But in fact, and this is why I always think librarians are sort of my heroes. I should confess, I married a librarian, so my credibility in admiring librarians is well established. But just that process of just creating a space, it's not just books, right? Creating a space where everyone can go and find themselves, whatever they happen to be, I think is remarkable. And for me, that was it. Like I'm not, I had wanted to be an author before, but I'm not sure I would have been if I hadn't found that one thing, right? That box of cassette tapes from Ralph McInerney that kind of unlocked whatever it was that was holding me back. So support your local library.
I just want to say, and then I'll turn it over to Diane. You obviously were already a creative. You were already an artist, but in a different way. And when you were, whether you were singing or you're performing, were you fantasizing about doing something else, about being something else?
Yeah, I mean, I've always had a weird approach to that. So when I was 16 years old, I was kind of lost, which is a fairly natural state for me. And I went camping by myself on an island off the coast of British Columbia, and I just had this sense of I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life at all, and nothing kind of fit right for me. And I ended up, back then when you went into like a little like a ferry stop or a little corner store, they'd have those sort of spinning racks sometimes, and there'd be different kinds of paperback novels on it. And in fact, I happened to pick up this novel, and this is the actual one. It's called Bard by Keith Taylor, he's an Australian author. He's actually a lovely human being. He was the first author I ever wrote to when I got my book deal. And I read this book because I was sitting there waiting for a ferry for 4 hours. And I read this book about this character that was a bard who traveled all over, got into sword fights, had adventures, told stories, and sang songs. And when I remember reading it and going, that's it. That's the life for me. That's what I want. I want to be a bard. Unfortunately, there are very few jobs for bards. Help wanted. There's no category on LinkedIn for bards. And so I sort of accidentally, over the course of all my different decades, ended up doing everything from, I worked as an actor for a little while. Absolutely terrible actor, but I was a traveling musician. I went sort of all countries around the world. I fenced, sword play, and I actually choreographed sword fights for the theater, and eventually became a novelist. So basically, over the course of many decades, I finally managed to sort of become a bard in the aggregate. And so that's kind of what always drove me from that standpoint, was that it was less, I have to be an astronaut, or I have to be a musician, or even I have to be a novelist. It was this other kind of adventurous life that I was always seeking out and continue to seek out to this day. It's one of the ways that I treat my writing career like an adventure, which means I get to have lots of ups and downs, which is part of living an adventurous life.
Your background is really fascinating. And I think you also have education in a completely different area, archaeology. Is that right?
Yeah, my degree is in archaeology, which I was literally one of the many people that I think every archaeology professor kind of must just mock behind the scenes, which is the people who watch Indiana Jones and go, yeah, that's what I want to do. But real archaeology is the best way I can describe it is it's like camping. You're outdoors all the time. You're mostly sleeping in tents. You're, kind of digging in the dirt, and it's a very methodical process. It's a scientific process. So in a sense, your laboratory is that outside space. So for people who really enjoy that lifestyle, it's wonderful. For me, I hated it so badly that 4 hours into my first dig, I left the industry forever.
That sounds like a traumatic dig.
No, it was lovely. The people were lovely. I just suddenly went, oh my God, I absolutely hate this. And I don't want to do this ever again, which is a terrible way to go. But the good thing is, and I always say this, we've become, I think, more and more focused on university as this kind of career ticket. And of course, the arts and archaeology, although a scientific pursuit, fits within the arts generally, broadly speaking. The arts are all about just preparing your mind for the world. And so, I did history as well. But it almost doesn't matter what you do. Like you're trying to expand your mind. You're trying to develop critical thinking skills and all that. So for me, it was still fantastic. I got 100% of what I needed for my archaeology degree. Despite the fact that I never earned a penny from it. But if I'd taken music, maybe I would have never become a musician. So.
That is so well said. You mentioned adventurer. Those words I was thinking completely, but also you're a lot like me in the sense of if I am reading this correctly, you can share with me. You embrace life, and every chapter you're learning and becomes a building block, which led you to where you are today. And I think that's incredible. And the fact that you realized early on, okay, archaeology is incredible, but digging is not for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've just, yeah, everything I try to treat everything as an adventure. I mean, I'm an existentialist philosophically, which for those in the audience who aren't so familiar with it, is just a perspective that says there's no inherent meaning to the universe. There's no, the opposite of existentialism is essentialism. And when we approach the world from an essentialist standpoint, we're going, well, there's these essential truths, and even if I can't prove that they're real, they are there, and I must obey. We must follow those. Whereas an existentialist says, well, no, there is no kind of obvious absolutes to the universe, but human beings can't live without meaning. We're incapable of existing without meaning. And existential angst, which people sometimes think of, is when people feel like, okay, there's no essential meaning to the universe, and they have no meaning themselves. And so because I sort of view the world through an existential lens, the duty of the existentialist is to choose what is going to be meaningful to you and try to live authentically to that. So it's and so for me, one of those is I know the things that are essentials. Remember, the things I've chosen to be meaningful to me, which are travel, adventure, romance, accomplishing things, making things, integrity, and so I try to approach everything like that. So even when Diann, when you're talking about mentioning adventure, a few years ago, my wife and I were on a cycling trip in Vietnam and Cambodia, and I got hit with kidney stones. And for those who've had kidney stones, it's quite rare that anybody describes their episode of having kidney stones in positive terms. But at the time, I remember going, you know what, this is this thing, and it's happening whether I want it to or not. And at the end of it, I'm probably going to be fine, because they generally cure kidney stones, right? They blast them out of you. And so all I get to decide now is whether I'm going to treat this as this horrible, depressing thing that's happening to me, or as an adventure, right? And because it was all new experiences, and proper adventures aren't all having a great time. There are struggles, there are dragons, right? And so I treated having kidney stones, and it's the strangest thing to describe, I treated that whole, 8 weeks of my life as if it was an adventure I was going on. The different hospital procedures that I'd never done before. I'd never been under general anesthetic before. I was in a hospital in Cambodia, which is not usually where you want to go to hospital typically, but in fact, it was a fantastic hospital. And so the weird thing is, I have nothing but positive memories of the 8 weeks during which I was dealing with kidney stones. It's different for my poor wife, who's like just remembering how I was getting more and more yellow as different procedures failed. But for me, that's how I just try to approach everything. And as a novelist, as a writer, I think that's integral, because as we were sort of saying before the show started, we have no control over the externalities of being a novelist or being a writer. You can't control whether people buy or don't buy your book, or whether an agent does or doesn't want to represent you, or whether a publisher does or doesn't want to publish your book. And so you have to sort of focus on the things that, as almost everyone I know who's a writer says, you ask them, why do you write? They don't say, because it's easy cash. They say, because there's things I want to explore. There's things I want to see. There's things I want to understand. And by writing, I can do that. I want to create art. Well, you can do all that without having those external successes. And in fact, my experience has been, the more I chase the external successes, the worse things go. And in fact, the worse I write. The more I chase after just writing the most passionate, honest book I can, strangely, the more successful I end up being externally. And I'm not saying that as in like, here's your guaranteed formula, like just stay true to your art and you'll succeed. But I do believe that if you just keep writing and keep getting better at your writing and keep making the best possible books you can, one way or another, eventually you are going to build an audience, find an audience, and find that external success. It's just that if you chase it, you're almost always miserable. And so, I prefer to not be miserable.
It's a very positive attitude. And I'm sure you didn't take any of those swords and go tell a publisher, I'm going to use this sword on you if you don't publish me. I couldn't help but notice your source.
It's a tactic I have not yet attempted, but I am keeping in my arsenal just in case. It may be necessary. There's a lot of strange people that you deal with in this business, from, you know, agents and publishers, reviewers and readers, Hollywood types. You know, I've because two of my series have been optioned for television. I've gotten to meet some really interesting Hollywood people, and you know, some of whom are really wonderful and down to earth, and some of whom are exactly as you would expect from watching, you know, sort of satires about Hollywood. So, you know, yeah, there's a lot of adventure to be had. So you never know when maybe the sword will be the answer.
Sebastien, you're obviously an excellent storyteller. I'm really just enjoying listening to you and everything that you're sharing. How, if at all, has your success changed you?
Well, that's an interesting one. So, I mean, to sort of place the notion of success in context for your listeners, for your audience, because of course, when we think of a successful author, we can think of, you know, if you think of James Patterson, well, James Patterson's success is, you know, tens of millions of dollars every single year in earnings, and you know, massive accolades and incredible numbers of books out there. He's got his own publishing imprints now. My definition of success in terms of the external side of success, like, okay, what am I hoping to achieve, was literally just, can I earn a good full-time living just writing novels? In fact, when I used to characterize it when I got my first book deal, that I had achieved the barista level of success, which was that my book deal was such that if I just wrote one book a year, I would earn roughly as much as a barista working at Starbucks. That said, I haven't asked a lot of baristas how much they make at Starbucks, so maybe they're fabulously wealthy and I just don't know it. But my goal then, you know, from that standpoint of success, was to you know, to hit what I like to call the dental hygienist level, which I did with my next series, and then eventually I hit, you know, plumber, and then finally chartered accountant. So you know, so when we talk about success, like for me, success has always been, you know, can you make this into a job that you do and earn a good living at? So that's my level of success. Is I've earned a great living at this for the last 8 years or so since I started, and I've never really aspired to sort of, you know, be earning $20 million a year or something and owning a yacht. My wife and I love to travel, but we get to travel. So in terms of how it's kind of changed me, I think if it's, being 100% honest, one of the things that it does change is you start to have an inherent nervousness about losing what you have, right? About losing, you know, you sort of go, oh, well, wait, this last book, you know, here's where it landed when it launched, and will this next book do as well? And or, you know, or sort of going, well, are my royalties going, you know, up or down? Or, you know, my books have been translated into 15 languages. You know, how much of my royalties are coming from the fact that the book's published in, you know, German and French and Hebrew and Russian and Ukrainian and all these different languages versus how much it is in English. So it's the kind of thing that the way that it can affect you is that you worry about losing what you have. And so at that point, for me, what I try to do is I just try to be really responsible on a financial level with how I handle my finances, so that I won't start to panic. Because once I do, as I was saying before, once I start to worry about that, I start to think things like, well, maybe this idea for a book would be more popular with this audience than the book that I actually know that I can write. People talk a lot these days about what authors should or shouldn't write. And I always kind of laugh at that, because the notion that I can write like 15 different things really well is bizarre to me. Like, I'm lucky that there at any given time are 1 or 2 books I can write really well. The notion that someone could say to me, no, you should actually, don't write about this kind of stuff. You should write about this kind of stuff, is nuts to me. I would just be terrible at it. So it's very important when you're achieving a level of success, not to allow that to become this constant panic. It's almost like, it's funny. This is a terrible analogy. So my wife and I don't have kids. We never really wanted to have kids, but people that I know who've had kids, and when I ask them what that shift is like, they go, there's this thing now that makes you incredibly happy and incredibly anxious all the time. And so what I find is when I start to view my career in that light as this thing gives me so much joy, but oh no, like I could lose it so quickly, then that starts to ruin me as an artist. And if I'm no good as an artist, then I have no business really writing books anyway. So that's the shift. There's lots of wonderful things to achieving, even what I think of myself as having a nicely moderate level of success as a novelist. But there's also, you start to get that worry. And so you have to always kind of go back to, I did this, I could have sold shoes for a living and made probably a lot, run a shoe business, maybe made a lot of money that way, or some bizarre new media venture that I'm not qualified for. But I chose to do this because I wanted the joys of making novels. And so I have no business freaking out every day about whether, I'm getting richer or not, but rather just need to focus in on the art. And I apologize, my cats have a sixth sense for interviews and always want to come in and yowl when there's one going on.
We love to meet people's pets. So
absolutely. I love what you said, because if you concentrate on, I have to write this so I can make this kind of money and get people are reading or what, you're not being to what you stated is important to write authentically, to write passionately, you said. And I really appreciate that. And I think that's why you are more than just a modest success.
That's very kind of you to say. You're 100% right. It's the advice, the classic advice for writers is always write the book you most want to read. And the shift on that, the twist on that I put on lately is write the book you most want to read boldly. In other words, you have to write it almost with a kind of, fanaticism is always a weird word to use, but I'll trust everyone to interpret it correctly here. But write what you love with a certain fanaticism to it. In other words, if you love Twilight, which is a young adult series about sparkly, handsome vampires, and you just love that, the challenge that happens for writers who go, that speaks to me, is then they'll hear how uncool sparkly vampires are, how uncool Twilight is, or how problematic it is. And all of those things are perfectly valid, but they don't alter the fact that if what you love, what you really want to write about is sparkly, handsome, sexy vampires, then what you have to do is actually not temper it, not let the critique hold back your kind of artistic impulse, but actually lean into it and go, no, I'm going to write the sexiest sparkly vampires that have ever been written. Because people aren't looking for, publishers, especially for those who are interested in the traditional route, publishers aren't interested in good books. They're interested in special books. There are so many, decently written manuscripts that hit their desks that they're always looking for what's special and the only kind of lever that most of us have to pull on to create something special is to write about what we feel that spark about and just go with that 100%. That's our only kind of tool to go, that's going to make this special. When we try to just purely intellectualize it and go, let me analyze the market with my utter lack of training in statistics, economics, or sales, let me analyze this market and determine what's hip. And then I'm going to find like the perfect sort of set of variables. That never really seems to work very well. And even if it does, I just think personally, I'd be miserable. So you just got to write the book you most want to read as boldly as you possibly can.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for saying that. You mentioned a number of things that to me sort of translate into the business of being an author. And I really, my ears opened up, my eyes flew open when you mentioned your first book deal. That's huge, and obviously subsequent others, but you also mentioned about options. So for people out there who are thinking, well, I'm just writing this, it's never going to go anywhere, you might have felt about that way yourself, and now look at you. So can you talk about book deals and then options for TV series or movies?
Sure, absolutely. So the typical way, the old way, there's there's several different routes to being an author, and they're all equally valid insofar as if the art is good, then that's our job. The traditional route that was the way most people did it up until fairly recently was you write a manuscript, you get an agent. The agent's job is to take your manuscript and put it in the hands of an acquiring editor at a publishing house, convince them to buy it. That editor goes to what's called an acquisitions committee or an acquisitions meeting, where they then have to convince the sales department, the marketing department, the publicity department that this book and this author could be successful. And then if they all agree, then an offer gets made, and that offer becomes a book deal. And the book deal could theoretically be for a single book, which is in fact it was the case for Malevolent Seven. Was on a one book deal, which worked perfectly for me. But with the Great Coats, which is my first series, of which Trader's Blade was the first, that was a 4-book deal. And in fact, sorry, I'm just going to grab one here. The Spellslinger series, which is my young adult magic series, was an 8-book deal. And so they'll sort of put together a deal, and the deal consists of an advance. So, for example, I think my first book deal, I think, was for the advance was something like $25,000 per book, and then you earn royalties. So every time one of my beloved readers went out and bought a book, it might be like $1 of that was actually my royalty, and that first dollar dropped the amount of the advance that was owed back. You would never have to pay back in advance, but you have to pay it off before you start actually getting royalty checks. The first book that sold, knocked that from $25,000 down to $24,999. And so once you've sold more than enough books to pay off the advance, you start getting royalty checks. But that's only one avenue by which a book can earn the author money. So, for example, with Trader's Blade, they sold what's called world rights publisher. So sometimes you make a book deal with a publisher, let's say in the United States, and all they want are North American rights. So they'll give you money, and they're only buying the rights to sell in North America. So the United States and Canada, and theoretically Mexico, but in Mexico, it's usually going to be in Spanish. And so it mostly won't apply. But there's other territories. There's the United Kingdom and the rest of the Commonwealth. And then there's other languages. There's German, French, Spanish. There's all of these big, vibrant communities of readers out there. So sometimes what happens is your agent is selling those individual rights if they can. And it is very difficult these days for a debut novel to get translated, to sell translation rights. But in the case of Trader's Blade, I think a German publisher bought the rights to all 4 books in that series for something like 10,000 euros per book, which translated to about 15 grand. So 2/3 of the advance for each book was already paid off just from the sale of the German rights by my world rights publisher. And just to clarify, I mentioned before, you might have some publishers that are only buying sort of rights for their regions. But what's also very common, especially in the United Kingdom right now, with a UK publisher, is they'll buy what are called world rights. So they'll say, look, we're giving you an advance. We're getting all the rights in all territories, in all languages, and in all formats. And they literally have clauses in the contract that say, like all formats existing or to be invented in the future throughout. And sometimes you'll see this line in a publishing contract, throughout the known universe. And that's just to protect in case we start living on the moon. They want to make sure that they have the rights to sell your books on the moon, which seems bizarre, but it's, the lawyers got to get paid for something. And so, to round this out. So what'll happen there is your contract will specify, if we, your world rights publisher, sell, for example, the rights in another language, so in German with the case of Trader's Blade, you get 80% of that. So 80% of what that German publisher paid to my world rights publisher, 80% of that went towards me, which meant towards the advance. Simultaneously, they had also sold the Canadian rights separately to Penguin Canada for, I can't remember how much, but some trivial but not insignificant amount. You know, something like $8,000 per book or something, which actually isn't trivial at all. I shouldn't say that. But basically, what it meant was before the first copy was sold, I had already earned out my advance just because of translation rights. So that's the weird and kind of, I think, very fun when it's going well. Part of being a novelist is that there's all these different avenues and pockets of money that your fiction can or your books can earn, depending on whether, you know, a publisher halfway around the world goes, you know, this English book I think would be very successful here. So, for example, Spellslinger, this series, this young adult series, I think it's published in 14 different languages. And so I remember the first time I got a copy of the Hebrew edition, and, you know, Hebrew's sort of written, you know, right to left. And so, you know, just picking up that book was kind of fantastic. And so I think, you know, that before I jump onto options, did I do a half decent job of covering basic book deals?
I think it's phenomenal, and I think you've just made fantasy a reality. So,
This is true.
I have a zillion more questions. I just want to acknowledge, Diane, I know that you need to run, so I want you to go ahead and ask a question, and we can come back to options if that's all right.
Sure. I would love to hear what inspired you to write your latest book. If you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So my latest book, for those who aren't too familiar with my work, is called The Malevolent Seven, and it was a kind of a strange novel, right? So it's a fantasy, dark fantasy adventure novel. It's full of irreverent humor and anti-hero characters. It's about these 7 mercenary mages called Wonderists, who basically sell their spells to the highest bidder, which are usually jerks. So warlords trying to take over, you know, an enemy castle, hire these mercenary mages to basically blast the thing to bits, so that then their cavalry and infantry can kind of go and mop up. And so these are not the nice guys that we think of, and that's kind of the point of the story, is that they end up going on a mission where, despite their determination not to be heroes, they discover that sometimes when things are going really badly, even the worst of us are kind of forced to be a little heroic. And so that's kind of what it's about on the surface. What made me write it was kind of a really weird combination of events. So it was February of 2020, which was right when the effects of the pandemic were starting to have effects in North America and in Canada, where I live. And a lot of people wrote what are called pandemic books at the time, but I didn't have any troubles. I have a pretty privileged existence. I live in a place where it's easy to go outside a lot, which you could kind of always do. But what I was coming through was I had just finished the 6 books in the Spellslinger series, in the main series, which are young adult novels, and it was publishing 2 per year, which meant that every 6 months I was getting copy edits back. My copy editor for those books is absolutely wonderful. She's brilliant. She adds sparkle to the prose. But I was also starting to see language getting more and more policed. So copy editor will rarely say, you can't use this word. They will say, hey, this word is going to cause trouble. And so words that were fine in book 1 were suddenly becoming a problem in book 4. And so by the time it was done, I was really kind of feeling a little constrained. Right. You know, like you can't swear at all. Young adult novels, you can have all the violence you want. You can have mostly all the sex you want. But, you know, a swear word, now that's when everybody's going to freak out, which really kind of bugged me. And simultaneously, the industry itself, the discussion in the world of fantasy was becoming more about who should or shouldn't write what. And you can't write this and you shouldn't write this. And that was bothering me. And then even other things like publishers saying, well, this is what's hip and this is what's not, which we were talking about before, that is not good for the creative brain. But even actually people writing me going, oh, I love this book so much. Can we please have more of this character? Please never kill this character. All that stuff becomes so much noise in your head that I just felt paralyzed. And so I just went, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to write a novel that is nobody's going to read. Like, I'm just writing it for me. Screw it. I earn enough money for my books. I've got another book coming out. I'm just going to write something just for me. And I'm going to do all the things I'm not supposed to do. Right. It's going to be like, I'm going to swear constantly. I'm going to write about things you're not supposed to write about. I'm going to screw everybody. Right. Like that was literally the driving impetus of the novel. And the weird thing that happened, I wrote that novel, the first draft, in a month. And the strange thing that happened was, the strange thing was my agent at the time, who I had told I was doing this, said, can I read the manuscript? And I said, sure. And then she came back and said, I love it. I want to sell it. And I said, you're nuts. There's no way this book is going to sell. And then she was retiring. She passed it on to my new agent, who then read it and said, I love this. I want to sell this. And I was like, you can try, but nobody's going to want to buy it. And strangely enough, Quercus bought it and published it to a reasonable amount of fanfare. But the thing that I mostly learned as an artist from that experience was I had gone into it feeling very sort of almost censored. This happens to us a lot. We see what's being discussed on Twitter, usually by people who are not that pleasant. And we go, oh my God, there's so much censorship. Everybody's being canceled. I'm being canceled. And it's like, nobody was canceling me. And in fact, it turns out nobody was censoring me, because none of the things I actually wanted to write about, none of the things that people are complaining about when people write about, were things I actually wanted to write about. So as an artist, the only person censoring me was me. And so what was fantastic about writing The Malevolent Seven, including the fact that it got published and it's pretty successful at this stage, was that it taught me, it freed me up. It taught me that, if you just write something for yourself and do all the things you feel like you're not being allowed to do, you will often discover that actually nobody's really holding you back that much. And maybe you'll write something that's true to what's actually bothering you. And just to round up the story about this, I discovered that what was actually bothering me wasn't censoriousness on the internet or the publishing business or anything else. What was bothering me was that I think as a society, we've started dividing the world up into good guys and bad guys. And the seven main characters of the Malevolent Seven, they don't see themselves as the good guys, and I don't think anybody else would either. But the problem with that is the definition of a bad guy is anybody who's ever done anything bad ever. And the definition of a good guy has become someone who's never done anything bad. In other words, doing good things doesn't really make you a good person anymore. It's just not doing bad things. And I had this feeling, I was really wrestling with this feeling of, what is that going to do to us when we breed a generation of people, especially like a lot of, I don't want to get into social stuff because I'm not qualified, but I see a lot of young men who are feel like they're, I guess I'm the bad guy, and then they sort of strangely embrace it and they become kind of more aggressive and more negative and more toxic, because, if you're convinced you're the bad guy, then you have no responsibility for anybody else. And so that's what, Cade, who's the main character of this book, starts out as a guy who's done some bad things in his time and thinks, well, I'm just one of the bad guys. There's no point in me. I'm not the person you should look to be a hero. But at some point, I think, if it doesn't matter if our local firefighter is horrible in 500 different ways, like we disagree with them about everything. When the house is on fire, we need them to come to us. And when our neighbor's house is on fire, even if they hate us and have said horrible things about us, we need to go help them. And so that's ultimately, Diane, you're asking, what kind of prompted Malevolent Seven. And that long story is to sort of show, number one, I thought I knew what prompted it, which is what happens when you're writing a novel. But it's actually only after you finish the book that you realize what you're really writing about and what really prompted it. So that's what it was for me.
Thank you so much. That was so fascinating and interesting.
I know I could listen to you all day. All right, so we're going to go back to options, and I have so many other questions. Let's go to options, and I'll get to the next one.
All right, I'll be really quick on options. So, I talked about the different ways that a book that a single story that you've written can earn money, can earn from selling in print, in ebook, in audiobook, in different languages and different territories, right? Another way that it can earn money is if somebody wants to turn it into a TV show or a movie. And so what happens then is they option it. So an option is similar to what happens in the stock market. In the stock market, an option is you pay money for the privilege of buying something at a fixed price, regardless of how much it ends up being worth during the life of the option. That is a terrible explanation of a stock option from someone with no qualifications to do so. So I apologize. I'm better on the book front. On the book front, what happens is a producer or a set of producers or production company might come along and say, you know what, we think, and this is the case with The Great Coats, we think this would make a great TV show. So we're going to pay you X amount of dollars for an exclusive option for a period of It used to be a year. Now more often it's 18 months. And so for 18 months, no one else is allowed to try to turn this into a TV show or a movie. And so what they'll do is then they'll go off and they take the book and they will try to sign up a writer and a director. That's like sort of called packaging. They'll try to put together either a pitch or sometimes an actual pilot script for TV show or script for a movie. And then they'll go to a studio and say, look, we have this book and we've put together this great director and this great writer and this great actor. We've got this famous actor on board. Give us a bunch of money to make this thing. And that's generally what you hope will happen. And then if that does happen, it can become a show. From the author standpoint, what happens is first you get some money for the option. And typically there will be an extension. So if after 18 months they haven't done anything yet, there'll be a clause in the contract that says they can pay you another lump of money, and then they get another 18 months, which is what's happened with this series, in fact. If they go to production or they want to go to production, then they have to actually buy the book. So before they just optioned it, they were just basically buying the right to buy it at a fixed price. Because if you think of it from their perspective, the price that you might sell the rights to your book when no studio wants it is going to be lower than the price you would sell it if you knew that Netflix was desperate to make a TV series from it. And so by optioning it, they've secured a price, and it's always quite a fair price. I think in the case of the Greatcoats, it's something like $220,000 as a floor, and $660,000 as a ceiling based on the production budget. There's a whole bunch of factors that go into it. They stick in other fun, weird little things too. Like if it's a TV show, the author will be a consultant on the show, and they'll pay you like $3,500 per episode, or these weird things. The way I usually describe it is like maybe one out of 100 fantasy novels that get published will be optioned. Maybe 1 out of 100 of those options will go into development. Maybe 1 out of 10 of the ones that went into development will actually shoot. And of the things that get made, 0 out of 10 will be any good.
It's incredible what you're sharing here today. And what I'm also taking away is that you're really an astute business person. And I think that's some authors really don't understand about the business of being an author. And I've heard, this is taking care of that. Oh, the publicist knows it. No, you need to know the information, and you know it like the back of your hand.
Yeah, you have to have a sense of how this stuff actually works, because otherwise you can be, look, the second worst position to be in as an author who's trying to earn your living, the second worst position is if nobody's buying your books, you're not making any money. The worst position would be if everybody's buying your book and you're not making any money. Like that's the worst thing that happens. And, there's a lot of parallels between the music industry and the publishing industry. And if you look back in time, all of these amazing musicians and artists who wrote these songs that are on the radio still today, 40 years, 50 years later, some of them were signed up on deals that meant they get none of that money. So you have to understand how that works, but you also have to, just from a personal finance thing, and I won't go into that too much, but you're in a business where the only secure money, the only money you're going to get, with any sense of confidence is the advance. Because typically when you sign an advance, like for example, if I sign an advance for, let's say, $30,000 for a novel, and that advance will be paid out in 3 chunks, sometimes 4, but I refuse in contracts to allow it to be 4. But the 3 chunks for me will be 10,000 will be on signing, 10,000 will be on when I deliver the manuscript, and 10,000 will be when it's actually published. So that's the only money you can rely on. The rest of it, you don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what my royalties are going to be. So my royalties get paid to me every April and October, right? And until it happens, I have no indicators to tell me how much that check's going to be for. So the way that I manage my finances, for example, is when I had my initial success, I made sure that I always pay myself a year late. So my salary that I pay myself, because I just find it easier to pay myself a salary. The salary that I pay myself for this year was money that was earned last year. I'm never spending this year's money. The money that I'm earning this year goes into an account that will, part is for taxes. We have very reasonable income tax rates here in Canada, but they're not insubstantial. and part of that is for next year's salary. And so that gives me a cushion of basically around a year. So if everything just fell apart, like if just, all of a sudden publishers collapsed, I would still have a year to sort out what I was going to do. And I think for anyone in the arts, I think that's a useful, I honestly think for all of us, it's useful, but not everybody can do that, obviously. But when, as a writer, especially, if you get lucky, and you have some initial success, your first task, I think, from a business standpoint is go, okay, how do I use this first hit of success, not to buy myself a boat, but to ensure that I can keep doing this creative work that I love without fearing what's coming next year.
I love this. I think you could be teaching courses to all of us to help us prepare for the future. I want to go back to something else, because we're all about bringing hope and education, inspiration here. When you got that first book deal and you knew you were going to be getting 25,000, whatever amount of money, and then you had to produce 8 books, for example, was there ever a period of time, because this is what came to me immediately, I was like, oh, I'd be like, I'm not good enough. How am I going to turn out that level for 8 books for that amount of money, and then get into your head and then you can't produce? Did you ever feel that way?
That is largely a daily sensation for me. I think Aaron Sorkin is one of my favorite TV writers. He once said that writer's block is his default position. And it often is that way for me. There's a part of it, every writer's different. So, it depends on what kind of works for you. What I discovered when it gets really hard, so writer's block, when we talk about that, we sort of elevate it and denigrate it at the same time. Writer's block is actually just anxiety, right? That's all it is. It's just it's a feeling of, I can't do this right now, right? And everybody actually gets that. One of the things people say about writer's block when they dismiss it, they go, writer's block, there's no such thing as plumber's block. Well, there is plumber's block. It's called anxiety and depression. And sometimes plumbers do get it, and they have to fight through it. They have to figure out how to get the help that they need. And so what I found is, first of all, storytelling is something that it's innate to all of us, but it is a muscle, right? It does have to be exercised. And the reason that you need to exercise it is not so that you can write, better. It's so that writing is not as calamitously difficult. And so I found that I just had to kind of go, I just have to go back to the mines, I have to go back and dig. You have to dig in your subconscious. You have to, people always ask that question, where do writers get their ideas from? And we all have our, glib answers for that, which is nice. But my honest answer is I write into the gap between what I see in the world and what I feel inside. So I see out in the world, people dividing each other up into good guys and bad guys. And I go, that feels wrong to me, right? I don't like that sensation. Something's wrong. I'm not in tune with the rest of my fellow, or a substantial portion of my fellow human beings. And so then I'll go and I'll write a book like Malevolent Seven, where I'm turning that gap into a story, into a world that I can explore. And that's one of the best things about it, because by the time you're done, not only have you finished a novel, but you've also kind of reconciled what's hard out in the world, like what's not connecting between you and the rest of the world. And you've put it into a form where someone can read the Malevolent Seven and they'll basically know how I feel about these issues to some degree, without me ever having to be polemical or didactic, or like without me ever having to, send a message, so to speak. I'm not really in that business. I'm not qualified to do that. But so that's the sort of the miracle, I think, of writing novels, is that you're taking the things that you don't understand about the world or that feel wrong, and you're both getting over them while simultaneously producing something that, as a story, actually kind of is your answer to that problem. And so that's what happens when you're writing a series, when you've got, Spellsinger was an 8-book series. 8 times I had to figure out what is something about the world from the standpoint, because it's a young adult series, from the standpoint of when I was a teenager, or what I see teenagers going through now. What is something new about the world that doesn't make sense to me, that I feel like, wow, this is really hard. What would that look like? And then you turn that into a fantasy novel.
Wow. Woo. So much
Very
incredible
kind.
content there. We have a few minutes left, and Diane, I could just monopolize them. So I want to let you get in again.
It was fascinating what you had to say. And I was also thinking for us authors, as we're writing, and it seemed like it's also therapy for us so we can stay on track. And I'm actually really looking forward. I'm going to go on Amazon and buy that book. I'm very excited.
It's very kind of you. I apologize for all the swearing in it, but it was necessary.
That's okay. I'll go to confession afterwards. No, I'm just teasing.
And Sebastien, I went on Amazon. I also went on your website. I went on Barnes and Noble because I want to buy the book also. And I wondered, how involved are you in terms of the marketing of it? I see it's available in hardback, it's available in ebook, and it's available in audio, but not in paperback. Is there some marketing rationale to that?
There is, especially with British publishers. So the theory of the hardback is the hardback. So a lot of books don't come out in hardback first at all anymore. It's actually getting more and more rare. The hardback is almost like it's almost like an ad in a way, right? It's almost like the way that they say, "Hey, this is a really important book. Look, we published it in hardback." At the same time, they will usually, and I don't have one here, but they'll usually create what's called a trade paperback. And a trade paperback, in fact, I can show you one. A trade paperback, so this one, it's almost the same dimensions as the hardback, but it's paperback. And so trade paperback are used for often foreign editions or when they're sending books to Australia or other places like that. But the real sort of money is on the mass market paperback, which is what we think of the smaller paperback novels. So when they're doing that, they will release the hardback first to kind of make that big splash on that statement, and grab those people who really love, a lot of readers really just love hardback books. And your most devoted readers of a given author will often go out and get the hardback. And then 6 months later, they'll release the paperback. So that's what's going to happen. So 6 months from now, you'll be seeing the mass market paperback for Malevolent 7.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Thanks for explaining that. It's like the hardback is more permanent. It's something that's going to be around and live through the tests of time.
Yeah, it's more and more it's become like I'll sometimes describe them as artifacts. Like the reason a lot of people buy physical books now in an age of e-readers, some people prefer reading in print, of course, but also some people, the number of people who will buy a book in ebook and audiobook and then go out and buy the hardback is remarkable, because they'll go, you know what, I really love this book and I want a physical artifact of this book. I want something on my shelf that kind of holds that experience for me and that I can go back to or that I can show people, which is why I always fight long and hard to make sure that the hardbacks, that the covers are as beautiful as they can be and as meaningful as they can be, and that the production is as good as it can be. And in fact, these days, often a lot of the ways that the bestseller is made, especially in the UK, for example, is through subscription boxes. So you'll have these services where they'll have, X thousand subscribers who will automatically get whatever's in that subscription box for that month. And if your book is in one of those subscription boxes, well, that means all of a sudden you've pre-sold, X the 100 or 1,000 copies of a hardback book. One of the strange things with Malevolent 7 was that there were, I think, 4 different special editions of this on publication from 4 different secondary publishers. Some did, sprayed edges, and some did, special imprint on the book. So that's one of those things. More and more, I think the role of the hardback novel or the hardback book is to be that artifact, that thing we put on the shelves. And if you think for a lot of people, they can't afford, art to put on the walls or things like that. But we all need art in our lives, right? And so a book can be a piece of art that has as much meaning as a painting or a sculpture.
That's a beautiful way to describe it. Absolutely. Have you considered doing any coaching or mentoring for other authors out there?
I periodically, like I've been roped into that. I used to teach and I used to design curriculum for Vancouver Film School, which is a terrific entertainment school here in Vancouver, British Columbia. And so I do like teaching. I do like coaching. I haven't kind of set myself up for that. There's a whole, that as I'm sure you both know, like that's a whole business of its own. And you have to be very mindful of how are you ensuring that you give people value, and how do you ensure that you're not stealing from your own time to create your own art. And that's one of the weird things. Like one of the scariest things for me about teaching sometimes is it can be such a creative act. Like I do often sit down with newer writers, who will, they'll just approach me at an event or something. And so I'll have coffee with them and I'll sit down, and often it's like they're trying to write a query letter or they're stuck on something. And it's so kind of creatively satisfying in a way to sit down with somebody who's struggling with a writing problem and try to help them find their way through it. That can kind of scratch the creative itch, which is not what you want when you're a novelist, right? You want that itch because that's what makes you go to the keyboard and start writing your next book. So that was a long way of saying, I've been thinking about it because it comes up a lot, but I haven't quite figured out how to do it right to ensure that actually I'm delivering value to people, like genuine value. Sometimes people just love, coaching from a published novelist just because it can feel fun, it can feel good, it can be inspiring. But actually what people need is whatever it is going to get them back to the keyboard to finish their novel and get their book out into the world. So I have to figure out how to do it right.
Yeah, I really see you as someone who is a coach, taking someone like me who's already published books and turning them into moneymakers. That's where I really see. And there's so many people like me out there who could use someone like you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I would never want anyone to confuse knowledge with talent. So I have knowledge about how this works because I've experienced it. But the talent for marketing is its own genuine creative talent. And that there's a, it's sometimes it's that thing. It's funny when we were doing the marketing for 1117, I remember my North American publishers going, we really want to kind of hit the Dungeons and Dragons market, right? Because people who play D&D also tend to often read fantasy, and we were sort of looking at ways of doing that. We created like little character cards for each of the characters and what their D&D class and all that stuff would be. And so figuring those things out, like that's an art form in itself. And I'm not sure that I have the talent for that, but I thank you profusely for thinking that I might.
I know that you do, but I appreciate that. Thank you. And thanks for staying late with us today. Our show has gone on for another 20 minutes, which I keep you here for another hour, but I respect your time and congratulations on everything that you've accomplished. I'm going to spotlight you again. How would you like people to reach out, and who would you like to contact you?
Well, anybody who reads the books is always lovely to hear from. I get quite a bit of mail, email, and things like that. The best way to reach me is through my website, which is www.decastell.com, and De Castell is spelled Decastell. I'm just holding. I keep holding the book. It's like I finally learned how to plug a book or something. But just for the spelling, Decastell.com, and there's a contact form on there. And if somebody has read the book and wants to say something about it or wants to ask a question, I'm always happy to hear from people. I reply to everything. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but I always reply. I'm also on Twitter at De Castell, but it's not a medium I'm very good at. Being a novelist, not a short story writer, I can never quite make those 280 characters work for me. So the website's the best way to reach me.
All right. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope you'll come back and see us on our other shows and continue to share your knowledge and expertise.
I'd be delighted to do so. Thanks so much.
Thanks again. Bye for now.
Bye.
What a great show, Diann.
That was really fun. I'm like you, Dr. Jacqueline. Not only are his books exciting, and I hope everyone will make sure he goes to his website and find out more about him and order his books, but the wealth of knowledge he's shared for our viewers is phenomenal. So I really appreciate him staying a little longer and being on our show and brightening our day.
I do too. I didn't even get to ask him about his reviews. He's got a lot of reviews. You know, that's hard to get. It's hard to get people to go. In fact, I just spoke to somebody today who bought some of my books and she didn't leave any reviews. I was like, please do it. And he's got thousands and thousands and thousands of reviews. So he's really figured out how to make a business of his art. And I think that's where people get lost. People are doing something that's a hobby, or it's something that they're passionate about, but they're not putting themselves totally in it. And I loved what he shared when I asked him about coaching. He made a really good point, which is you can't be everything to everyone. And you're going to start to denigrate your own value in one area if you don't have a plan. And I know that I crossed the line with that as the owner of this platform. And then as a coach and an author, it's hard to be able to do everything and do it at the best level. So that's where the imposter syndrome comes in for me. But I feel like Sebastien has really nailed it. And I really admire what he's done. He's a great storyteller as well. And he's really enjoyable to be with. So I'm glad that he was here today.
Me too. And all valid points. I loved how he said, you know, you can have knowledge, but it doesn't mean you have talent. And it does take to learn that craft and have the talent to make sure that you're writing authentically. And yeah, I can see why he's so popular.
Absolutely. Diann, I'm going to spotlight you and tell us about, if you can, any project that you have coming up and how people can reach out to you and buy your books.
Thank you so much, Dr. JACALYN. So everyone, thank you for tuning into our show today. Make sure you share this show with your friends because they will have such a wealth of information. You can reach me at diannfloydboehm.com, DIANNFLOYD.BOEHM.com, and make sure to sign up for my newsletter so you'll always know what's going on. And Dr. JACALYN, as you know, my latest book, Boomer, the Curious Bunny, is going to be out very soon. It's getting put together, so we'll be announcing the due date any moment, and it's like birthing a baby.
Very exciting, Diann. I'm really happy for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it, and I'll be in touch with you later today.
Okay, take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye. I just want to thank all of you for watching, for listening, for letting other people know about us. As I mentioned, we're over 101,000 views on YouTube in the last 28 days. And I want to thank our team. We've got a team of probably 55 or 60 people now who are making this all happen since January 15th of last year. And also just a shameless plug for my books and for my team who are working on them. Our books are for children and their families to learn how to listen at an elevated level. So all of the books teach some listening skill, the power of listening, as well as something about Mother Earth and saving our planet. So our books are called The Amazing Adventures of Lady Ella, the Listening Mentor. And you can see one of them right here. Here it is. This is the first one. And all the animal characters on all of our books represent real people who have taken my course, The Power of Listening, and they've become elevated listeners. So they get a certificate. They're featured on our websites. But more importantly, they're all about having us listen to each other without judgment, without interruption, without stealing the stage. And the one that drives me crazy, providing a solution. You're just having a conversation with someone, and all of a sudden they say, I know what you need. No, you don't know what I need. I just need you to listen. So thanks for listening to me. And we will be back with our next show, which is The Wise One, starring Mr. Red O'Loughlin. So please do tune in for that, followed by Talking Heads. Thanks again. Bye for now.